Yeah, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning for some of you and welcome to the second panel of tonight, focusing and addressing curating in the age of crises. And I think an important question would be, is there ever a time without a crisis? And I'm really very pleased to have a very full panel with many colleagues from different parts of the world, and all with a link to Sharjah. And I would really like to thank Hur Al-Qasimi and Salah Hassan and the fellow members of the working group for the Sharjah, for the 15th Sharjah Biennial, to bring this all together to honor the late Okwi Envesor. It's on 15th of March, just 2 days ago, was the second anniversary of his passing. Hard to imagine that it's already 2 years. I've been actually in Sharjah when it happened, and I know how saddened we all have been. And yeah, I can't imagine. But the 15th of March is also the 20th anniversary of the inauguration of Documenta 11 in Vienna, 18 months before its initial planned start in Kassel. We inaugurated with the platform Democracy Unrealized, and our keynote speaker to kick off the entire Documenta is the late Stuart Hall, was the late Stuart Hall. And he brought forward this notion of that democracy is always at the horizon, it never can be reached. It's always a work in progress. And I think in these days, I think we'd never imagined that 20 years later, it would prove more true than even then. And if we see shifts to the right and an increasing takeover of countries by right-wing autocrats, by military juntas, corrupt governments, yeah, a lot of questions can be addressed tonight. We heard in the prior panel, what can a biennale be? What should it be? What is the role of a biennale in these times? And we heard this also in other wonderful panels in this series already, and the inspiration. I remember Anita Dube and Yuko speaking about what can really be also a contribution of the arts in these moments. But it also reminds me that during Documenta, shortly or just a few months before we inaugurated, 9/11 happened, the attack on basically on the World Trade Center in the US, on the Pentagon, and on other places. And we had this discussion, can we do a documenta right after? What would a documenta look like? A number of the majority actually of the curators of the 11 came from the United States. And what does that mean? And we came to the conclusion, it's actually too short. Artists cannot react immediately. They are not there to solve the problems of this world. But what they had to contribute dealt with the world that maybe led to 9/11. And I think this is also what we might address tonight. There is not a new crisis. COVID is not the world pandemic that caused a global crisis. It's a result of a global crisis. And it's a result of global capitalism and of like increasing inequalities and access. And yeah, so I leave it at that. So I really think also there was a mentioning before about a biennale where my dear colleague Sarat Maharaj was involved, the triennial, the Guangzhou triennial titled Farewell to Post-Colonialism. And I just want to mention in a discussion with him about that, about the title, he said it's not about like not addressing post-colonialism, but they were wondering, did we ever leave colonialism? So shouldn't we address colonialism first before we address post-colonialism? And again, I'm sure tonight we come to that. Yeah, a bit of housekeeping. Please keep your microphones down, and also for when you don't speak. And also for our guests, there is a choice of language at the bottom of that of your screen. You'll see the sign interpretation, and you can shift between English and Arabic. And also, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will address them at the end. We will leave enough time to have your questions also involved in our conversation. But now let me start. We have, like, as you see, a number of great guests, and I will introduce them actually in the order of the presentation. But let me welcome now Christine Tohme from Beirut, Enrique Rivera Gallardo from Santiago de Chile, Sammy Baloji. I don't know, Sammy, you're in Brussels, or like you're in Brussels. Lucrezia Cippitelli from Milan, and Tirdad Zolghadr from Berlin. But now let me introduce Christine. Christine Tohme is an award-winning curator and the founding director of Ashkal Alwan, the Lebanese Association for Plastic Arts, which she established in 1993 in Beirut, where she also lives and works. Through Ashkal Alwan, a non-profit organization that supports contemporary artistic and curatorial practice, she created Homeworks, a forum of cultural practices, in 2001, and the Home Workspace program, a tuition-free interdisciplinary study program founded in 2011. Tohme was the curator of the Sharjah Biennial 13, Tamawui, which extended to Beirut, but also had projects in Dakar, Ramallah, and Istanbul. She serves on the boards of Marsa, a sexual healthcare center in Beirut, and on Saha, an association in Istanbul that supports contemporary art from Turkey. Beyond the 13th Sharjah Biennial, she also has been involved in its 15th, is also involved in its 15th edition, and she has participated in numerous March meetings, 2014, 2016, 2017 and 2021. And I met her first in Sharjah in 2009 when I served on the jury. And Christine, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ute. Curating in the age of crisis. Firstly, I would like to thank everyone for making the time to attend this panel. I would also like to express my gratitude towards the Sharjah Art Foundation team for their invaluable work. March meeting is an ever stronger initiative I engage with on a yearly basis. And needless to say, SAF has and continues to be home. Enrique, Lucrezia, Sammy, Tirdad, and Ute, I'm happy to be in your presence today, co-thinking the task of the curatorial in times of crisis. This framework is one I find particularly fitting to elaborate on my practice, which is intertwined with that of my role as the founding director of Ashkal Alwan in Beirut, Lebanon. As an institution, Ashkal Alwan was born in and around crises in the mid-90s, at a time when the post-war reconstruction project in Beirut was materializing. Like most regional cultural institutions, we learned to navigate a terrain where a force majeure event is always at the precipice of unfolding. If anything, the emergence of critical contemporary art practices in Lebanon was in itself linked to that of formations associated with civil society, aiming to counter A, the privatization of urban commons in and around Beirut, the amnesty law allowing warlords and militias to evade accountability, C, the lack of efforts to account for the 17,000 people estimated to have gone missing during the civil wars. At the time, artists and colleagues were absolutely imposing a vision of artistic practice as a vessel through which civic discourse should exist and express itself in the public realm. At that point, the post-war economic expansion was in full swing. The cultural sector was being reconfigured by public and private sectors alike to facilitate capital flows and contribute to the whitewashing of a regime reproducing its hegemony through superficial reforms. Today, Lebanon, at this point, as I was telling, we were discussing before we start that as we speak, the protests are taking place in the streets. Today, Lebanon is facing three different crises unfolding simultaneously. A, an unprecedented economic and financial crisis characterized by the ongoing devaluation of the local currency, currently 100% below the official exchange rate as we speak. A crisis of political legitimation wrought forth by the October 17 uprisings and the protesters' call for dismantling over 30 years of systemic corruption, sectarian power sharing, and austerity policies. And three, a sanitary crisis in conjunction with the emergence of COVID-19 on a global scale. Furthermore, on August 4, 2020, a large amount of ammonium nitrate stored at the port of the capital Beirut exploded. It was believed to be one of the strongest recorded in human history, claiming the lives of over 200 people and rendering 300,000 homeless overnight. Now, while Ashkal Alwan faces different challenges that aren't strictly related to its local context, it's safe to say that we are undergoing a specific crisis in Lebanon that's producing its own set of morbid symptoms. Currently, the Lebanese government is attempting to suffocate the cultural sector by imposing tax measures, doubling down on forms of policing and censorship, and threatening the lives of activists and dissidents. This continues to affect the work and programs we do at Ashkal Alwan. A new era of cultural isolation is being ushered in, and it's now up to us to determine the tools that enable us to engage with the battles to come. We have long been committed to alternative modes of cultivating friendships and networks of solidarity, but what do we do? Committed to alternative modes of cultivating friendships and networks, but what do we do when the artists, cultural practitioners, thinkers, and activists that comprise our community are either leaving or being driven out of Beirut and stripped of their ability to work? My sense is that displacement and paralysis are among the most significant we will be facing in the coming years. It was inevitable to redefine the function and scope of our public mission by asking ourselves how publicness in itself can be deployed and experienced, and towards which parameters the public sphere can be expanded. It is becoming increasingly difficult to separate the consequences of these crises on our institutional work as well as on our everyday lives. We are perhaps having to face the most acute form of precarization that's ever been registered since Ashkal Alwan began. In order to move forward within our struggling economy, it became evident for us that our modes of operating need to be revisited while adhering to the mission of our work. Responsiveness, agility, and lightness need to replace large-scale programs with heavy impact. Certainly, the current crisis is pushing us to experiment with new forms and methods, as well as challenge us to think outside of conventional ways of going about institution building. In March 2020, and after 5 years of work, we finally managed to launch Ashkal Alwan's audiovisual archive, making available terabytes of digital recordings to the public. This wouldn't have been made possible without the efforts of many of our colleagues. Later in June 2020, we set in motion Perpetual Postponement, a bilingual online publishing platform inviting artists, scholars, and writers to reflect on the present conjuncture and give meaning to our delayed destiny. The Ashkal Alwan team first conceived this initiative following the indefinite postponement of the 8th edition of Homeworks, a forum on cultural practices, a multidisciplinary 10-day event originally set to launch from October 17 to 27, 2019, and which had been halted due to Lebanon's popular uprisings. Throughout the institution's 27-year lifespan, many, if not most, of our programs have either faced delayment or cancellation due to the precarious nature of the socio-political climate. It thus invited us as a team to reflect on our own institutional history, as well as its imbrication in a region where the weight of uncertainty has long supplanted the business as usual mantra, a condition now being felt on a planetary scale. After the August 4 explosions, our work was directed towards repurposing our facilities, and prioritizing our community studios project. We opened our premises for artists, art collectives, activists, and journalists, and hosted them in our studios according to their respective needs. Now more than ever, we are committed to upholding our networks of care by tending to community members facing increased economic, psychological hardships. In January 2021, we inaugurated the 10th edition of Homework Space program, Ashkal Alwan's 10-month art study program, with a Zoom-based seminar series attended by more than 80 participants from Lebanon, the broader region, and internationally. HWP was in fact rethought into an open access educational structure that doesn't require application nor admission to respond to an increased demand from young artists by broadening the pedagogical scope of the program. We have been overwhelmed by the public's unprecedented enthusiasm and are convinced that amid precarious conditions, interdisciplinary forms of learning and exchange remain matters of great urgency. This edition of HWP continues to prove itself to be highly inspiring for us. To see practitioners from the world over battling Zoom fatigue and willingly joining to participate in generous and thought-provoking intellectual exchanges at a time when gathering in person has become nearly impossible is nothing short of miraculous. Many within and outside the cultural sector have been pushing the term resilience to describe these types of responses and activities. However, I believe it is important we think past resilience and its supposition that one has to persevere despite and not against the conditions that have been imposed on them. In Lebanon, we have long sustained and fed the discourse of resilience, whether as cultural institutions who are imbricated within larger civil society networks, or as inhabitants of a country where the state of the exception has become the norm. I believe we should instead be seeking to engage in oppositional politics. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Christine. And I think this constantly working against like state developments. And I think it was even when you started Ashkal, it wasn't an easy time, and to really open up and then facing a period where things do get more positive, more open, more dynamic. And I mean, I know with homework, so much has happened. And then like being confronted, what happened with the explosion, as you said, like, again, it's just like, this is usually the tip of the iceberg of what's going on, you know, and this, I mean, it was so devastating, and to hear that, and the loss of lives. And I think it's also so brave that people in culture continue, you know, not losing their spirit, and realizing this is the moment they have to be there. You know, it's important for society to have access to art, but also for artists to have the space for expression. So I think it's really amazing what you do there since so many years. So thank you so much. Our next speaker, I want to shift over to Enrique Rivera Gallardo, who I also met at his place in Santiago de Chile, I think at a better moment than it's now, politically speaking. Yeah, it's really, before I introduce you, I just want to say I'm really concerned also from the messages I just get from Chile, like that it's not much reported outside, that the government, again, the right-wing government uses the COVID situation to really go against the intellectuals again, and really shifting things more to the right. And maybe you can say something about that. Enrique Rivera Gallardo is a filmmaker and curator based in Santiago de Chile, as I said, where he also serves as the director of the Media Art Biennale since many, many years. He studied at the film school and pursued directing at the Universidad de Chile, and has also a BA in art direction. His projects include The Vanishing of Los Andes in the Centro Cultural Ricardo Rojas in Buenos Aires, and The Fourth Encounter of Art, Science, and Digital Culture, amongst many others. He has also edited numerous catalogs for the Media Arts Biennale and also several editions of Art Science and Digital Culture and Cyber Synergy, 1917 to 1973. It's also his first participation in the March meeting, and please, to the public, excuse me when we are short in the introductions. All of them have very esteemed and long careers. Check it out on the website, but just to give you a bit of a background, and Enrique, maybe you really can speak also to the current situation when you now speak about the Biennale and the condition you're in. Let us welcome now Enrique Rivera.
Thank you very much, Ute. It's a pleasure to meet you again on the occasion of this beautiful panel with colleagues from around the world. This is something that it's very particular. I was hoping to see you there in person, but well, I hope that in the future we will make it. And concerning to your question, Ute, yes, this I think that as you mentioned before, the sanitary crisis, it's provoked by the model, the capitalist model, apply also in a planetary way. So we are living one of the consequences of this situation, and art and culture for sure has been detecting, smelling these conditions since long time ago, and somehow this gave us the possibility to prepare ourselves. And concerning to our Biennale, the Biennale in Chile, this is something that it's that we have been aware of the situation, because historically this Biennale was made before the Chilean French Video Art Festival, organized at the 80s in Chile during the dictatorship, as a collaboration with the French Institute, with the Embassy of France here in Chile. And what was quite important is that this encounter was an opportunity to see video art and the dialogue between Chilean and French experimental filmmakers, but also an opportunity to gather and to meet in an occasion where it was prohibited by dictatorship to meet and to develop agreements on the countercultural scene in Chile. So it was very clever in that time, because they used the space of the French Institute, that was like international ground, to meet without the intervention of dictatorship. So how this is used in the next step of the Media Art Biennale, the Video Art Biennale, where there's the organizers of when the democracy came in Chile in the 90s, they create this video art biennale that it's called now Media Art Biennale, also to organize itself and to create cultural policies and to give a space for the artists that were experimenting on different formats. So this bring together, for example, filmmakers and also activists, people that was using the technology in a critical way. So since 1993, this Biennale has been putting together these people, people that it's coming from aesthetics, from art, and also technical specialists, understanding how internet also was evolving, was being a media of connection and somehow giving access. And also this gave us the opportunity to observe how internet was changing too, was converting in a oppressive media at the same time, as Umberto Eco was saying. You can find all the knowledge, but also all the stupidity there. So, and also how internet it's becoming in a media of oppression and surveillance. It's something that for us has been we didn't lose just the streets because of the pandemic, we also are observing how internet, how, for example, this conversation could be monitored to then take advantage or make decisions about how we are dealing with the concepts and the budgets and the different alternatives that we have to express ourselves and to have a determined action on the social participation. So coming back to your question, yes, I think that there is a tendency, a planetary tendency on how the COVID-19 has been used to terminate public policies. For example, we are living something similar to the time of dictatorship. In terms of we have a military state now, the militaries on the streets, and it's difficult to justify this situation in terms of the sanitary crisis. And then you have recently you have for example decisions like they change the person that was in charge of the situation in Araucanía. It's the south of Chile, where the Mapuches live, that it's the original people from Aboriginals from the south of Chile, that they have been in war since the last 500 years, first with the Spanish and then with the Chilean state. So, and they never were defeated. And this is like something quite interesting because they are on a state of resistance, of resilience, that it's, and the pandemic has been used to manipulate, for example, decisions and the use of militaries on this zone. So for sure that we are living in a situation of manipulation, of massive manipulation, where data is being manipulated to take decisions around the control of the streets. And this was for us quite interesting also to understand in terms of the current situation, because we have to remember that in October 2019, we started a revolution, the uprising of the 18th of October, provoked that we could change the constitution, develop in dictatorship. We still live with the constitution made in time of dictatorship in Chile. And this is a contradiction to living with a constitution developed in the moment of dictatorship. So we started in 2019, the last part of 2019, with the revolution, with the uprising. And one of the measurements taken by this government was to change the constitution. This government gave the possibility in that sense to change this elemental force, because basically it was about to fall. This was the last chance that government had to stop the complete breakdown of the state in that sense, because it was impossible to hang on. So it was quite peculiar in that sense we are changing the constitution in the context of the sanitary crisis with all these measurements of control, where we had this hope that we will develop this new constitution in the context, not just to change the articles made in dictatorship that that prove that in Chile neoliberalism it's a kind of a lab creation for the rest of the world. They always say that the neoliberalism was born in Chile. And one of the mottos of the uprising was that, yes, it was born in Chile, but will die in Chile also at the same time. Thanks to this new constitution, this is what we want to believe. But not just that, also the possibility to add, for example, what is happening in terms of digital and digital democracy. And this is quite important because we are living in this turmoil of the use of digital currencies for example, today the discussion about NFTs, it's quite important on the art world and how we are dealing with the problem of the transactions, the digital transactions. So it's a huge opportunity for Chile to add a concern about how we are dealing with digital economy in this new constitution, that it's determining to understand the new social relations and the new political relations. As Eric Satan was revealing, we are living in this siliconization of democracy. And the relation between right and left, maybe it's being obsolete now. So our last Biennale, the curatorial subject was the fourth world. And the fourth world, it was a concept raised up in the time of Allende, Salvador Allende, when they organized the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development in 1972. And it was quite interesting because they was proposing that we have to transcend the first world, capitalist, the second world, communist, and the third world, that it's the underdeveloped world. And the fourth world was an advertisement, an advertising of how we should stop use the nature as a natural resource, how from the third world could emerge an alternative to industrial capitalism. So we take this concept, we wanted to use it in the context of the Biennale because in Chile, in 2019, there was two big events that the government was organizing. One was the APEC conference, that it's the Asia Pacific Economic Conference. This was in 2019, and COP25. So Chile was supposed to be in 2019 like an epicenter of international economical evolution of capitalism, of neoliberalism. Was the president will confirm the protagonism of Chile in the region. They were attacking Nicolás Maduro. They were attacking all the countries that has, for example, Bolivia. The country was converting in a kind of axis of neoliberalism. And the Biennale was, for us, an opportunity to also show, like a mirror, this situation. And for this, we organized a Biennale using the fourth world as motto. And yeah, now we are using for sure the idea of the fourth world in the next Biennale that will be between October and December this year, to understand this interregnum, the possibility to transcend also from one constitution to other, and from this state, catatonic state, we want to call it, that it's determined by to wake up again.
Yes, thank you, Enrique. I really hope this all will happen. And as I said, the messages didn't sound too good, but I hope it is not as bad. And again, you also indicated that in reference also to this farewell to post-colonialism, I mean, countries often state the experimental laboratories for others. I mean, like, as you said, with Chile, as a playground or as testbed for neoliberalism, actually, from the Chicago School with Milton Friedman. So it's really interesting, the Western democracies having quite some other outlets elsewhere to test their things. So I think that's also something we need to address. But I want to come now to Sammy Baloji. Welcome, Sammy. Sammy is an award-winning artist born in Lubumbashi in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where he studied literature and social science. He currently lives and works between Brussels and Lubumbashi. And he's rooted in the industrial and cultural heritage of the Katanga region, And Sammy's work explores the memory and history of the Democratic Republic of Congo, as evident in his one-person exhibitions such as Congo, Fragments d'une Histoire, Le Pont du Jour, and Cherbourg et Content, extractive landscapes at Salzburg International Sommerakademie of Fine Arts, and Urban Now, City Life in Congo, Sammy Baloy and Philippe de Boeck at the Power Plant in Toronto, and the Open Society Foundation in New York, amongst others. His recent participations include Congoville and Middelheim Museum in Antwerp, Nireen, the 22nd Biennale of Sydney, Our World is Burning, Palais de Tokyo in Paris, Documenta 14, Athens, Kassel, and All the World's Futures, the Venice Biennale that was curated by the late Okwi Envisor. But Sammy Baloy is also the co-founder of Picture Encounters, a photography and video biennale in Lubumbashi, and I hope we hear more about that now. Welcome, Sammy.
Thank you, Ute, for this invitation, and I would like also to address my thank you to the Sharjah Biennale team for this occasion to present the Lubumbashi Biennale and to participate in this meeting. And I would like to say that it's kind of really interesting the way that, Ute, you kind of addressed this issue that the crisis is not only just about the COVID, but it's also how for most of our structures are in a way evaluating in a situation where it's all about the crisis itself. And it's even the crisis that in a way makes us to do what we're doing. I mean, I would say that for the case of the Lubumbashi Biennale, because it's part of, how to say, personal experiences that we've been going through with members of the Lubumbashi Biennale and the Picture Association. So to start by the Picture Association, which is a collective of art and art producers, and we are around 8 persons that we've been working since 2008 in order to make this Biennale to happen and to have this international recognition and networking in a way. So one of the things that we decided to start in 2010, this platform and also this art residency program, which is part of our activities that we're doing a part of the Biennale itself. It's actually started with the experience which I had with another photographer coming from Lubumbashi, from the name of Guldael Magambo. So we were invited at this Biennale in Bamako in 2007, and that was the first time that personally I participated in an exhibition and in a Biennale made by African people and with African intellectuals and diaspora, like meeting together around topics that concern, in a way, Africa, but also in relation to what is going on between North and South. So, and that was in 2007, and we were, I mean, my friend and I, we were really impressed to participate in this kind of events where we could, for the first time, to get in contact with people who were addressing issues that concerns somehow Africa when it comes to the colonial legacy, but also but all those injustices going on with current African government and all those kind of even the representation of African in Europe or in the United States. So it was really a really strong experience that we had. And at the end, I went to directly visit the curator of this Biennale, and it's Simon Jamy. Actually, we decided to invite him in Lubumbashi in order to make this type of event happening also in Lubumbashi. So why Lubumbashi? Lubumbashi, it's actually the second town of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So it's in the southern part of the country. And it's a mining area. and the Congo has been within independence since the 1960. But one of the things that we should take in account is the fact that since the end of the Cold War in 90 and the end of the, I would say the end of the dictatorial regime in 1990 with Mobutu, actually, we went through a really crisis period, and also another, I would say, dictatorial regime for like 7 years. And the country itself was completely locked down from the rest of the country. So we couldn't have access to other cultural events going on or having exchanges with other cultural centers. And the other thing also in Lubumbashi, in terms of art training, we only have a fine art school, so it's not a fine art academy. So it's a fine art school that it can be considered to be like 6 years of secondary school. So normally the students that are coming out from the fine art school in Lubumbashi, they are somehow 18 years old, and it's more about practice than theory itself that can permit them to judge and to kind of get in contact with society when it comes to how to analyze the political situation. So it's more in a way of producing art that is it's part of the colonial legacy, because the fine art school was created under the name of L'École de Hangar, and one of the main things that was behind this idea of pushing local artists to produce work, it was mainly for decoration and also for for tourists that were coming in Congo during the colonial period. So we only have the 6 years for like a secondary school and one museum, which is an ethnographic one. And for us, we wanted actually to really create an event that could somehow, so I'm talking about the museum and the fine art school on one side, and this is the art field, but on the political and also economical aspect, Katanga should be considered as one of the most rich province in Congo because of the mineral resources such as cobalt, copper, and even the uranium that was used for the Second World War came from Katanga, actually. So there's those two realities where you don't have infrastructures in terms of education or in terms of art practices, but on the other side, you have also a country which is, and a province which is very rich. So what we wanted to do after this is what I was trying to say, is that when we had this experience in 2007 at the Bamako Biennial, one of the things was to open actually Lubumbashi, but really to kind of take the consideration of these two realities that I've just presented now, to kind of work with it, which is in a way more related to the fact that this province has been constructed under the colonial regime and with a Western perspective. But and you have all this lake of infrastructures, but you have also this richness. But how to kind of connect this reality to the rest of the world through art, and this is what, in a way, was our motivation to do the biennial. So we started since 2008. We invited Simon Jamy, who came in 2010, and then after that we had another exhibition with Elvira, but really dealing with the lake of infrastructures. I would say that we had those exhibitions going on the public spaces in order to kind of go to the public and also to be in contact with operators that could help us to bring more light to what we're doing there. So since 2014, we started to work with another curator from the name of Tohme, and the idea was to kind of create a platform that could help to also give a strong training program to local artists. And for the next edition, we have invited Lucrezia, who's an art historian and a curator. And I think she will talk more about the program that we've been doing since 2014. Thank you.
Sammy, thank you so much. I think it's really also often misunderstood because we're discussing today, there are so many biennales around the world. And of course, well, yes, they cannot maybe be visited by everybody in the art world, but the immense significance and importance they have on the site, I mean, the local impact, I think that is often underestimated, what it really can do also to give more visibility for artistic production and how this can be embedded in a society also in order to give access to a young generation. I mean, I experienced that in Dakar at the Biennale there, and then later again also in Kochi and in other places. And so I really think it's very interesting that you also have like such a strong focus on education and outreach. And yeah, I think just before I introduce also Lucrezia, I just want to mention and confirm what you say when we did the platform of Documenta, platform 4 in for cities under siege in Lagos, on Kinshasa, Johannesburg, Freetown, and Lagos. We thought it's great if African scholars, African artists, and people can meet on African soil. But it was very difficult to get the speakers there because they still had to travel through the former colonial kind of like route. The Francophone had to fly via Paris, and the Anglophone had to fly also via Europe. So there were no direct flights. So it was very difficult to get this symposium together at the end, and very expensive. And I think this is also what we have to see. So this translocality in regions and the conversation with each others are not supported by the infrastructures. So it's really also very difficult to stimulate those debates. And I really hope a Biennale like yours also contributes to that. But now let me come to Lucrezia. Lucrezia Cippitelli is an Italian curator, art historian, and scholar who has developed several collaborative cultural projects in the Global South with academic and contemporary art institutions, research platforms, biennials, museums, and cultural centers. She holds a PhD in art history from La Sapienza University and Cornell University, the home also of Salah Hassan, the intellectual and academic home. She is a professor of aesthetics and at the Brera Art Academy in the same city, Milan, and where she is also a member of Cefare, an organization focused on cultural innovation and the transformative potential of culture. Her recent projects include Lubumbashi, Snaps in a City, Fabbrica del Vapore in Milan, and the second biennial of Bucaramanga in Colombia, and Urban Seno in Guakam, Dakar, and Senegal. Her recent books authored and edited include Eurocentrismo, Connecting La Habana, and the book of Tania Bruguera. Lucrezia is currently, as Sammy said, the Director of Education Programs at the Lubumbashi Biennial in Milan. Welcome, Lucrezia.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the presentation, which also reminds me that Salah is, I think, a mutual connection of all of us here in these meetings. And thanks Ute for the introduction. Thanks the panelists. It's very nice meeting and listening to you all. Thanks Sharjah, the team, fantastic, very careful, and who's following Piccha and what we are doing since a long time, and we are also discussing with them how to interact for the Biennale and for the future of Piccha. I took Ute from your general introduction the question, is there ever a time without crisis, especially in cultural production, especially if you talk about art and the impact of art and the possibility also to have funds and to work in a possible way. I'm very glad to be part of this process with Sammy, and I'm sorry you had to listen only 10 minutes, because Lubumbashi is really a place where you can learn a lot. And I want also to say, between parentheses, that my engagement outside Europe was always a mean for me to understand better where I was coming from, and understanding also Bauer and how it relates with outside Europe in terms of culture. So also working in Lubumbashi meant to me really to understand a lot about local reality and a lot about the way we as European built up narratives and structures. The work with them, I mean, we met with Sammy in Brussels through networks where we were involved, both of us. The first time I went to Lubumbashi was in 2017, invited by Sammy and Tohme, which was the former director of the Biennale of Lubumbashi, and also was the one who launched this educational platform. I arrived there as just to give a workshop for a while, and I met Picha, I met the space, I met the rest of the association, and I have met the city. From there, we've been discussing with Sammy and with the rest of Picha, because Picha is really a collective. And Sammy did a huge work in terms of really sharing his own network to this community. But also is a place, Picha, where all the other associated artists have a lot to do in terms of working and imagining and providing with some kind of support. It's really, in a way, a grassroots organization which has very specific, well elaborated and also high level of artistic quality peaks of art production. Picha managed to keep both, to keep a very strong activist attitude in the city, and at the same time a very interesting, high quality artistic production. And this is an element which I think is very interesting. If we try to answer to your question, is there ever a time without crisis? Well, I think for Picha, COVID was a moment of slowing down, but I don't think there were ever really a moment of where things were going smoothly in terms of economies. I mean, Picha provides funds to itself without any institutional support or economy, just to start with. So there's no backup plan. There is only an international network, which is very, very important. So the support of Sammy and the other part of the other artists of the group is relevant because it makes the place livable. When we discussed about following up my connection with Picha, I proposed to transform this educational platform in something which would run all over the year, or actually all over the 2 years between the two Biennale, because the first time I went there, it was an educational project really connected to the Biennale. So I proposed to have 2 years of intense educational activities and to organize activities in a way where invited artists will also be making research in artistic research in Lubumbashi and producing their works for the next Biennale. So this is also in this way that I got to become a curator of the Biennale. Which for me is a dialogue a constant dialogue with the people of Piccha, and also a work which we like to do with great attention to what is happening in the city. And this is something that I think is crucial for the economies, but is also very important if you think about how Piccha was born. I mean, in one of the earliest presentations, they said that Piccha, I'm reading now, is an initiative which wants to promote artistic creation using as a scene urban space and as medium images. So the site-specific work which Piccha does is actually a work which is really adding value to local histories. And local histories are not only histories that somebody from outside can come, look into, get some snapshots and go away, but they are local histories which allow to narrate what is happening in the world, and also the crisis, and also this power tensions existing between the West and the rest of the world from a local perspective. So what Sammy just told about Katanga region will tell a lot about us if we are ready to listen, in terms, for instance, how Katanga was the region which produced the copper used to enlight the whole Europe at the end of the 19th century, and how is now the place where lithium is extracted to create this kind of green revolution, which can be storytelled outside in the rest of the world as a revolution for the new cars who produce less pollution, but is at the same time polluting the economy and the landscape of this region. So this is why I think it's very important to have artists which we invite, but who are working with local younger artists, with local association, with local organizations. And this is a bit the plan that we are developing. Since 2019, I did the first, I did my first Biennale curating this educational platform, and we did projects which were very careful in using a young group of artists selected to be part of this Atelier Piccha. This is the name of the educational platform, and at the same time invited artists who were asked to produce with them their work for the Biennale. And by doing so, really being careful also in being successful, not only for the artwork for the Biennale, but also for the attention that their work could produce in the city. So we decided to work in different neighborhoods, and our main goal was to give visibility to the final work in the same spaces where it was produced. And just a little example, the curator, Sandrine Collard, the curator of the 2019 Biennale, invited Ruan Grupa. And as Atelier Piccha, we hijacked Ruan Grupa and asking them to produce locally. The project which made them very famous is the Gerobak Bioscope, is the portable cinema. But instead of reconstructing the same chariot, the same little car with the cinema, we just set up a lab which was working around 3 months to translate this idea into something which could work in Lubumbashi. So the design, even the name, which was called the Sindam Balabala, and its shape, and the way it was moving around the city, and even the fact that they decided to add a kind of economical addition to the cinema. There was somebody selling food on this chart, was really a way for us to get the idea from its principle, but to making it working in the city. So the plan is to work in this sense. I want to mention two things before I close. One, that for us is very important to have local networks. So we develop projects with partner organizations, for instance, Market Photo Workshop in Johannesburg. And second, we are trying to set up this program together with international organizations which come from contexts which are similar and have in mind this same kind of program. So I will close here, but thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Lucrezia. And I think it's really interesting, this emphasis also on education. I think that also links back to Christine, who also during the 13th Sharjah Biennale really had developed a year-long education program to really also give access, because the question is always what also stays for the people at the place, what is given, what can a Biennale really develop. Very often, if there is no institutional infrastructure, which is not the case necessarily in Sharjah, because there's also the museum, but like what is the education that goes beyond a classical art education? What is this discursive moment of understanding a place? And as you say, even maybe understanding in Lubumbashi what it means, the extractivism that is happening there, that on the one side there is poverty and then there is enormous wealth generated at the same place. And I think to really understand systemic violence and injustice, we need education, and to create this awareness. And I think also, I mean, coming from feminism, people like Bell Hook, and so they always said like education is a tool of empowerment. So I think it's really great that you guys also focus on that. I will now shift over to Tirdad. Yeah, Tirdad Zolghadr actually was my first introduction to the Sharjah Biennale when he became a curator of this the 2005 edition, together with Jacques Persekian and Ken Lam. And actually it was then that my class in Vienna went there, and we first had to Google where is Sharjah. I mean, it sounds embarrassing, but it's the truth. And ever since we were actually connected to there. But Tirdad, if I might allow, we met actually first in Geneva, where you were actually studying English in comparative literature. And you were at that moment, to my surprise, preparing an exhibition in Tehran in Iran. And that was in the end of the 90s. And I was very surprised that it was even possible. It was the beginning that we worked on Documenta 11, and it was not easy to get there, to meet artists. And we got some films for Documenta 11, but I was so stunned when you said it's possible. And maybe you can say a bit about that also in a moment where Tehran maybe was not on the map in terms of contemporary art, and maybe was mainly represented through Shirin Neshat. There was another kind of like Iranian art scene. Yeah, Tirdad, you're currently based in Berlin, and you are now working as an independent curator and still as a writer whose multidisciplinary practice and theoretical preoccupations are concerned with the impact of art and culture on urban development. Tirdad's curatorial project include not only the 7th Sharjah Biennial, but also the first pavilion of the United Arab Emirates in Venice. And also it titled It's Not You, It's Me. And but he is still also always an author, amongst others, of Traction, an applied and polemical attempt to locate contemporary art. And he is working at this moment on his third novel, Headbanger. He is currently the artistic director of the Sommerakademie Paul Klee in Bern University of the Arts, and was also until recently an associate curator of Kunstwerke, KW Contemporary Art in Berlin. Tirdad, last but not least, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ute, for the introduction. Thank you to the Sharjah team for making this happen. It's great to be part of this conversation. And to the audience, hang in there, 4 down, 1 to go. We're almost there. When trying to answer the question of what it means to produce art in a crisis, I'm not sure I'll have time to address Tehran. Ute, maybe I'll come back to it in the Q&A. I will be addressing the Riwaq Biennale in Ramallah, because I think that the Biennale vantage point is significant here, but even that will only be brief, because I'd like to make an overall overarching kind of argument, a somewhat polemical argument as to what it means to produce art in a crisis from a Biennale vantage point. And I'll start by pointing out that ironically for many of us, biennials have symbolized the professional crisis mode for a very long time now. For decades now, they've been the kind of show that we love to complain about. Too big, too dislocated, too exploitative, too expensive, and so on and so forth. And if we look at the very refreshing calls for a shift that came up during this pandemic, for deceleration, localization, sustainability, very refreshing and important calls, it seems that biennials are poorly equipped to rise to the challenge, because after all, the reason why why we opt for biennales as opposed to other infrastructures, other formats, is because of their velocity, because of the fact that they can assemble cultural capital, symbolic capital, financial capital at a speed compared to none, at least within the arts. They put places on the map, as you yourself mentioned, Ute, when you said that Sharjah suddenly became known to so many of us. And the price for this velocity is also a certain kind of standardization. People like to complain that artworks in, say, Sharjah are very comparable to artworks you see in Jakarta or Tehran. After all, we're not talking about art in the sense of, religious art, folkloric art, tribal art, street art. We're talking about contemporary art, which shares a planetary infrastructure, moral economy, institutional memory, signal effect, and so on and so forth. So the crisis embodied by biennales, in my view, is not one of uniformity or of scale, it's actually one of purpose. Why are we doing what we are doing in a situation such as this? That is the question that comes to the fore in the setting of a pandemic. If we choose to spread contemporary art across the globe, do we need reasons beyond contemporary art itself? My hypothesis being that contemporary art, particularly as embodied by the Biennale tradition, does not serve constituencies beyond itself. It's not made to represent interests other than its own, unless you decide otherwise and push for that persistently and aggressively and explicitly in the longer term. The default mode is one that represents the interests of contemporary art first and foremost. Now, within the question as formulated by the March meetings, it's a given that we do and should produce contemporary art. And in my case, I've come to the conclusion that my work is not a given and that it is not self-evident. If I could quickly point to Berlin, where I'm based right now, which is, Berlin is the only capital in the EU that's poorer than the rest of the country. Resources have been stretched for much longer than the pandemic. And artists have very often lamented the fact that they are made to compete with schools for resources. They're made to compete with refugee facilities, and so on and so forth. And this is in some ways unfair, and artists definitely claim as much. And I'm not one to argue, and I don't mess with angry Berliners. I'm very careful. But I do wonder where this sense of entitlement comes from exactly. And I think that it does come to an extent from a Euro-humanist tradition, which has made its way to many surprising places. Even as we claim to decolonize, we are actually intuitively very fond of this tradition because it allows for cultural production beyond purpose, beyond function. And this makes it a tiny bit easier on ourselves. It doesn't put that much pressure on ourselves to explain ourselves in a situation such as a pandemic. I'll take a step back and use my own trajectory briefly as an example. I was going to say a few words about Sharjah. 2005, I'll skip that for time reasons. I'll jump to 2014 when I was trying to co-curate a very particular biennial in Ramallah called the Riwaq Biennial. And I just wanted to share my screen for a second so that I can propagandize the Riwaq website, also to give you an idea of what it stands for visually. It's not an art institution, it's an NGO. And the Riwaq Biennale is named after this institution. It's not named after a place because Riwaq very unapologetically instrumentalizes the cultural and financial capital that is raised by its Biennale for working against displacement in Palestinian villages, for job creation, for a very inclusive form of revitalization, for preserving heritage, which in a place such as Palestine has a very particular political mandate and connotation. And this was an agenda that I very happily subscribed to, and I thought that my contribution as a curator would be to devise a version of the biennial format that would be self-critical and durational enough to cater to local necessities and interests. Now, here is where we bump into a very classic biennial dilemma, namely that for all their similarities, biennials are rooted in complex local realities that are impossible for visitors to understand, no matter how well intended. And so even though we were based in Ramallah at the time, I found myself parachuted into a situation, as I had been before in other biennial settings, where I did not quite grasp the pressures of the situation at hand. And I came up with a lot of ideas that I think are very valid, but they were also unnecessarily awkward and often beside the point. Thinking back, all I would have needed to do, and this is a hypothesis I'd like to share with my colleague, all I would have needed to do as a curator is to stick to the script and to try to deliver what biennials traditionally deliver so well, including the media attention, the visibility, the cultural capital, the social networking, and the funding, etc. So the idea being that in order to be helpful in a local crisis, contemporary art doesn't have to be critical or durational necessarily. It can be as quietist or commodified as you like. What it does need is a stated agenda beyond contemporary art. And so the question I'd like to end with is how do you forge such an agenda? How do you decide on such an agenda? How do you devise an agenda of the kind? To return to what I was saying in the beginning, to do justice to this crisis and to try to pursue deceleration, localization, sustainability, it needs more than budgetary survivalism. It needs the kind of vision that is actually proposed by a number of art infrastructures that are out there. Maybe also in the case of some of the projects that were described today, I wouldn't be able to judge, but I think a case could be made. It's very hard to pinpoint examples without distracting, but I will say that the upcoming documenta curated by Ruan Gupa might point to very helpful cases in point. And I would like to mention three methodological points that these kinds of infrastructures that that I'm pointing to do share. First of all, they invest in a given set of questions and answers on the ground wherever they happen to be. They do not attempt to explore every thematic under the sun, which means that they have the courage to be predictable and even boring at times. They do not succumb to the attention economy that we are under pressure to follow. This allows for an accumulation of expertise, which artists and curators are uncomfortable with, but this expertise is something that can point beyond critique and art production per se. And it is instrumental in terms of, and I'll end with this, in terms of drafting some other narrative, in proposing a moral horizon that goes beyond contemporary art itself. Roadmaps that you can build on gradually in the longer term, and that offer some kind of a scenario beyond the breathless pace of one crisis after another. And I'll end on that point. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Tirdad. And I think it's what you point out, I think we see, or we saw already in the other presentations, I think is a shift of really seeing the Biennale much more than its often limited duration, of really looking what happens before and what happens not only during, but also after. What is the trace? What does a Biennale generate in itself? And as you said, like, can it support not only education, but it's also a workplace. It includes the local infrastructure. But it also offers an opportunity if we engage, and Biennales do that, and I hope they continue to do that, not only shipping in artworks in and out, but bringing in artists to engage with the place and to be able to produce. And sometimes it's the beginning of something that happens much later. And I still think, for me, that is the big potential of biennials, really to bring people to places. And usually it's more like a seeding, and then something hopefully is happening. If there is the possibility at the place, and if there is an infrastructure that can guarantee that. And very often, I mean, biennales are operating under quite precarious conditions, and they wish to do so. And as you say, also with Rivera, and so, you know, like the maneuvers one has to do to establish that are quite challenging. And so maybe you also, I mean, there are like kind of like overlaps in your practices also of engaging also long-term with places. You're all curators, but you also have long-term commitments to places. So maybe you also want to react to each other's basically contributions, but you also know from each other. Yeah, please, we try to get a panel here going. So unmute your mics and feel free to speak.
Well, thank you very much, Ute. I wanted to add something to Tirdad, Christine, Sammy, Lucrezia. Thank you very much for the insights of and the experience that you are sharing. And I think that I want to add something very, very short to what also Tirdad was he was throwing some ideas, some concepts that will exprong the question. And for me, in that sense, I wanted to share something. We organized in Chile during the last Biennale in 2019 on December, the sixth General Assembly of the International Biennial Association. And the whole idea was to bring together the organization in order to understand how biennials are conceptual precision instruments that depending on how we apply this precision instrument in the time and context of the or a social context, it could transform situations, political, social, economical. And to strong this idea of to use this precision instrument that will chirurgically like cut or add or bring together ideas, people to, well, to develop new knowledges, to address to questions and situations that are hard or difficult to the society where the biennial is confronted. I think it's, yeah, when biennial could be like a service to society that will, and not a platform for the ego and the commercial use of art market. So for us was quite important to organize the 6th General Assembly in December, because all the people that were to came saw the social crisis in Chile. They act also as witnesses of what was happening in terms of human rights, of the condition of human rights in Chile, where the police and the state were acting in an uncontrolled way. So this is for us, this was the use of the biennial as a precision instrument. And the question is how we continue with this information, how we give to the temporality of a biennial, because you use this instrument each 2 years, or each 3, or each 5, or each 10, but you know that you will use this instrument again. And the responsibility of using the instrument is like the responsibility of a gun. You know, it's it could be something very dangerous, could kill you, could persuade. And so how we use this precision instrument, it's maybe another question to the.
Okay, I had a question. Can I jump in?
Yes, of course. That's why we said, like, I wanted to have enough space that we also can discuss.
Yeah, Enrique, you made me think of a way I could respond to Ute's question about Tehran and build a bridge to the larger discussion. So Tehran has an art field which is now quite professionalized, and which has pretty much any form of infrastructure that a contemporary art field typically would require, apart from a biennial. And I was looking at there's continuous talk about rekindling the biennial format in Tehran. And while I was at one point involved in this conversation, I was looking through old catalogs of Tehran biennales from the 70s, and one of the prefaces in the first page said, "Dear viewer, please forgive us for the fact that some of the painters who were exhibited 2 years ago are not around this time because they didn't have any new work to share with us." And this is very endearing, because nowadays this is unthinkable given the competitive pace at which biennales have to function. And this is the velocity I was referring to earlier, and it's also what makes the precision that Enrique was talking about just now so difficult. I agree that biennales have enormous potential, and they can be just as toxic as they can be helpful. But what makes them so hard to handle is these very heated expectations, and at the same time, the reason why we go for them is because of what in the previous panel was referred to as touch and go. The fly in, fly out mode is what creates this energy in the room, this excitement, people coming in who see each other only once every 2 years, etc., goes hand in hand with a desire for localization, for sustainable engagement, for precision. It's it's almost an impossible demand. It's like it's asking of a biennial to do what it's not primed to deliver. That's not the strong point of a biennial. The strong point is the speed. But again, these are hypotheses that I'm curious to know what the others think.
Yeah, any responses from you? I mean, Christine, and I mean, just like to provoke this even further, I mean, on the one side, the biennales, they bring a lot to a place, but a lot of the problems on the side, I mean, like as we spoke about Katanga, like Beirut, Ramallah, also now in Chile, the international community, those who really could create a change, you know, global capital or international politics, they stay stunningly always pretty silent, you know, while the artist community, the intellectuals also, they have to stand up. And sometimes I wonder myself, like, you know, what is if we stay silent, you know? So, you know, it's because it's, I mean, at the moment in Myanmar, I mean, like my friends texting me, they cannot leave the house. They have snipers on the roof, you know, like I'm moderating here a panel. Yeah, so the cynicism, the how to say that can kick in, you know, like how do we keep us going in this situation when we have the feeling that does nobody stand up? I mean, somebody has to do something about this, you know, the injustice, it's obvious, it's visible, but it stays kind of silent. And I mean, I'm glad that artists and the art community and writers and journalists and so, yeah, are still standing up. But I sometimes also feel, are we the band-aid, you know, sometimes on the deeper wounds, or how you feel yourself in this situation when you think now it's really, I mean, somebody has to stand up.
I respond to this?
Yes, because you went through this.
Yeah, I mean, it brings to mind sometimes like talking about biennales. I don't know if Homeworks is a biennale. Homeworks is maybe less than a biennale and more than a biennale. And this is, you know, the osmosis as part of this definition. But sometimes, you know, when the silence hit us, and I would say we have two kinds of silence and silencing. The silencing where you are killed, where you are assassinated, where you are not allowed to work, where you are all your rights as an individual are taken away, like so many things that we could all mention on this panel. And the second kind of silence, which is really sometimes I cherish, is that the international community does not come and that doesn't approach you. Because, you know, sometimes when you have all of this international community that jumps from one place to the other, and you have all of this you know, thinking about how to celebrate and, you know, how to do the cocktails and all of that. And even thinking of, you know, our work that we sometimes forget about content. And it was really interesting for me how in the past 2 years, we felt so isolated in Beirut. And it was very interesting because it was a gift that you don't have everybody jumping in, jumping out, because I think this is part of the problem. And we have to say that we in contemporary arts have participated. I mean, the way we talk about the explosion that happened in Lebanon and the way we talk about COVID, that COVID is the result of where everything has gone. We also, you know, this jump in, jump out, the speed that Tirdad was talking about, it's almost like narcotics. And it was so addictive and we all got addicted to it. But sometimes, you know, you need this silence. And as much as I feel isolated, I'm so much enjoying my isolation period because it gives me the power and the strength to be able to think of what we're doing. As I mentioned in my talk, everything that I mentioned with this, we as a team have been doing wonders. We have been sometimes, you know, I was wondering whether we would be able to go back ever to what we had before. And I have to tell you, the example of HWP, when we started doing it online, and the amount of people that are joining, like with, for example, Lawrence and Adrian, then today we're starting with Asha Salti, then, Lin Sharafuddin, Monica Basbous, all of these people, Tal Atwi. We had like around 100 students, 100 participants attending. And I have to say, this is something that with this fatigue, Zoom fatigue and all of that, I have to say that these people are willingly joining what they are joining. They are sitting through these fatigued Zoom, meetings. They have decided democratically to engage in this, unlike uni students who turn their cameras on and just pretend that they are there. So there's something that is powerful that will stay with us. And I hope, this seclusion and isolation that I'm talking about will be a kind of, a stamina for us to think and to actually think of biennales as pondering spaces. And as I say, responsiveness, agility, and lightness. I have to actually contest that it became too heavy for all of us. It was a big responsibility to handle what we were handling, whether we are, curators, I consider cultural managers, producers, facilitators, or artists. It was really a lot of responsibility. And I have to say, I agree, it was great to be with all of you guys. And also, it also reminded me every now and then. I was thinking today, would I join this meeting the way I joined the meeting during the explosion, August explosion with the FFA board meeting, and the explosion took place. And I told my colleagues, sorry, this is an earthquake. And this is where I want to say, we are in an earthquake mode. And actually, what we are thinking through is something that I would consider is a privilege at the moment. The silence, this isolation, this, stripping somebody of this, velocity, the velocity that we worked with. I think it's something that we need to reflect on our practice. And I hope we will go from somewhere to a place where I really miss my friends, obviously, but I really miss colleagues. And this is what is so dangerous for me, that this is the second part that I want to talk about, that Zoom meetings will never be able to replace everything that we've been doing, but everything that we've been doing has also participated to where we are today.
Just want to ask you also, and also Sammy, because what you say, Christine, I think we, to a certain extent, in one form, we all share that. I also felt it's good not to travel so much. It's also hard to say no to invitations, and so so to have the time to be at one's own institution, and so it's very important. But I also see, even here in Singapore, I mean, when people come back after the kind of lockdown that we still have, I mean, it's very difficult to enter the country and to leave. You will see a very different Singapore, because there is also things happening here like elsewhere, which is called spring cleaning. And that is not only housekeeping, it also means a number of institutions will be gone and a number of people will be gone. And I mean, what Enrique explained, what's happening in Chile under a pandemic, or in Brazil. I mean, I'm speaking often with my colleagues also in Brazil. I mean, what happened there under Bolsonaro. And so the pandemic is also a little bit like it's the wall behind which you can do what you want. So I see also at the moment a energized nation state, and not the best examples of a nation state where state power suddenly feels empowered, versus before the multinationals maybe became much more powerful, global capital. And now finally nation states, particular autocratic nation states, can show their muscle strength again. And you know. So I think, and this is also a bit the territory in which we operate, you know, like, so we cannot shy away from what's going on. Sammy, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to jump to what actually Tirdad and Enrique were talking about, the art production and the biennials. And I would like maybe to point the fact that maybe there is a trap in the term of the biennial itself. Because I do remember, for example, when I was invited in the Belgian pavilion with this artist Vincent Messen and Katrina Gregos. It was a period, and it was one of the exhibition that was quite relevant also for me, because it was interrogating the fact of the pavilion itself. In the Belgian pavilion itself was constructed by Leopold Leopold II. And when you start to think about that, and it's one of the previous pavilion to be held in that space, and Leopold is really linked with Congo, and at the same time you can connect it with also all those international warfare where African and other savages were also kind of exhibited, like here in Belgium or in France or wherever. So in a way, the production itself, it's really linked to this colonial system in a way. And it has also this this thing where you have the country itself, for example, Congo, or even Katanga. We don't have any history linked with the biennals of or any artistic production where you have also like people coming, like as it was the case, for example, in Senegal, where you had the Leopold Sédar Senghor starting to kind of create a movement where all those post-colonial intellectuals were starting to create reflections about around negritude or Pan-Africanism. You don't have that history, for example, in Congo. But at the same time, you have this country which is, and what, for example, the Congolese philosopher Mudimbe is saying, that it's a colonial invention, and Africa itself, it's also a colonial invention in a way. So, and there is also this other reality that you have two memories coming together when it comes to like what I could say, like the administration or the politics in Congo in relation with the traditional jurisdiction, which at the same time still exists today. So you have the colonial memory, which is the town that we can have, and the constitution in a way, which is somehow continuing what happened during the colonial time. And we don't even have, I mean, I would not be able to kind of tell you what is the good government that we had in our storyline since the independence till now. So, but you have a kind of cycle of violence and also corruption and all the things going on. And for us, in an artistic field, we needed, in a way, to be in a collective in order to exist. Like being in the cities that is so-called, like having a constitution that is more than the colonial one, but at the same time reproducing the colonial system. There is a need to exist, and if we want to exist, we need to be in a collective, and this is why, for example, we have this picture biennial or picture association in a way. And I can also assure that, for example, that for all the artists, the international artists that we've invited, and even the curators that came in Lubumbashi, I mean, it's not really the same condition as we can point, like when it comes to a Sydney Biennale or Documenta or something like that. It's really the conditions are completely different in a way. And what is interesting, I would say, actually, to make a biennial, for example, in Lubumbashi, it really comes to the point where it's questioned itself the necessity of a city. What does it mean to have a city? What does it mean to kind of deal with a city where there's no infrastructure, there's no a stronger politic agenda and a cultural agenda, or even education? So yeah, so maybe the name Biennale brings us directly to what it can be a Western way of looking at things, but I think it can be really different from one country to another, I would say.
Also, there is quite a number of questions from the audience, so which also referring directly to what you're all saying. So, I mean, one question is from Matthew Bird, if there is, because with the unpredictability of the current pandemic and the shift to more online, also what Christine mentioned, what do you think? This is his question. What do you think is the future of biennials and exhibition making in general?
Can I take the stage? And I just also refer to what Sammy just said and maybe reinforce it. I think the idea that this exhausting speed, which is required to Biennale, belongs a bit more to those who travel from place to place and visit and maybe give a talk or have a specific activity within something called a Biennale. I'm wondering if in the future we don't have to think about something which is more similar with what Picha is trying to do now, because if a Biennale comes out as a necessity of an association of artists, and if somebody who comes from abroad is not exhausting, but is really a resource, is like a treasure, is like somebody to whom you can connect and exchange and understand mutually what is your need as an artist, as a cultural producer, and so on. Maybe the future should be that Biennale are slower and that there is less of this speed and more as a field work, which cannot be done by anybody else than those who live in the city and who has really need to produce culture, to learn, to exchange. In the end, an educational platform is also a place where you exchange, where there are not institutions who provide content or visions or connections. So maybe it's really being more connected and slower is the key.
Yeah, there's directly a question that would kind of challenge this, or like putting a big question mark behind that comes from Nadine Fadel, and it says, can you speak more on the siliconization of the art world and the relevance of the digital landscape to the future of biennales? Like basically, I think now we're getting actually conditioned to function online if we want it or not. So how do you see this kicking in beyond also what Christine said?
I think that that there is something in that it's flying like a ghost in the situation of siliconization or the digitalization of everything. That there is this filmmaker named Adam Curtis from England, the United Kingdom, that has been developing this series of documentary films about the century of the self. And I think that the last one is I Can Take You Out of My Head. And it's quite interesting because the use of technology, of digital technology in terms of psychological manipulation, it's quite interesting. And you have the possibility to understand what happened in the United States with the election in Brazil, Brexit, so on. Different political situations that were manipulated by the use of digital technology, by social networks and so on. So I think that biennials in that sense are exactly a tool, a precision tool again, to understand and to reflect the use of image, the use of technology, the use of these digital platforms to put a critical view on the situations. And there is where I could dare to defend the existence of a biennial in how increase and powers the possibility to have a critical view on the present context of humanity, or what we think it's humanity. I like to think that we want to think in ourselves as humans, but we are not humans. We are living organisms in constant transformation, and the humanism is an ideal, maybe a colonial ideal of of the past. But now we need to think we need to break actually this notion of humanity also. And maybe a biennial, it's a good place to develop this outside of the academy, outside of the political world, the Congress. It's a place where we can think in a more free way these fundamental questions. Also, what I wanted to say is that I think that the aestheticization of the crisis, the use of the crisis, it's very dangerous. And there is where I think that we have also to have a critical point of view on how maybe there are institutions or people that is using a crisis to raise up fundings, for example, or to put themselves into the circuit without have the how you could say the position or the experience to do it, but just as a misuse of the reality of people that it's suffering with the situations of war and economic crisis or climatic crisis. So this is also, I think, the possibility of a biennial as a precision instrument to detect and to prove, for example, who it's really working for real with this kind of the crisis situations of society of the world, and to present it in a more precise way.
Yeah,
sorry, just to finish, to address the question of the datology, we call it there is a disease of data, of the increase of data, of the excess of data, of information. It's also a way to censor a situation of crisis. So internet, in that sense, or the use of the siliconization of art, it's also and the excess. There is something quite interesting that it's happening in TikTok, for example. They call it deep talk. No? So it's the absurdity, it's the flood of data, of information, of videos, of content that at the same time develop this separation, this isolation from reality. And this is, I think, one of the audiovisual image, the use of digital platforms are giving us this loneliness as society, this sense of interconnectedness that it's fake. So I think also this is a quite interesting point of crisis to work with.
Yeah, there is, in that respect, there is actually a question to you, Tirdad, by Joy Chenzi. And it is, you mentioned earlier, that's the question, you mentioned earlier a detail about attention economy. And can you say a bit more about this? How does this relate, or how this is to be positioned more in detail in terms of contemporary art?
Sure, I'll try my best. What I was referring to was the fact that you can choose what your curatorial priorities are according to what your immediate material context would suggest. And in that case, this will demand a kind of engagement that is not necessarily always exciting, but that demands a lot of repetitive engagement with the same set of questions over a number of years, which will eventually lead to more interesting scenarios than if you had just, visited a certain question for your next show and then moved on to the next one. If you choose to instead follow the dictates of the attention economy as largely determined by contemporary art when it comes to biennales, then it's a different set of criteria. You're less interested in you're less invested in the important, and you're more invested in what is interesting. Whether it is particularly helpful or not, or whether it is alarmist or not. So I think that there is a tendency to go for rather critical scenarios, for example, rather dark scenarios at moments when it's not always important. That too is part of the attention economy. For example, I'm not sure that like siliconization is a term that rings alarm bells and makes us all jump up in our seat and go, oh my God, what are we doing? Military industrial complex, etc. But if we're really trying to think of how to theorize the best case scenario, how are we gonna crawl out of this this lockdown pandemic situation and still build on what we've learned, then maybe we need terms that are a little less sexy, terms that are just more pragmatic and that try to help you see the pros and cons in a very sort of hands-on kind of way. But I think that the velocity we were talking about earlier has a gravitational pull towards themes and tropes that serve a more immediate attention span. I could go on, but I think I've more or less made my point.
Yet in this respect, there is also a question to you, Christine, from Christina Talbot, that addresses homeworks as kind of like is, as you mentioned, is less than a biennale and is more than a biennale. And the question is also, you were mentioned Ashkal that runs in an interesting format that is open to all. And can you say a bit more also in your experience, how has the participation evolved over the years of those who participated?
I mean, we started working on the program in 2008. It launched in 2011. This is our 10th edition. Every year it was, every year it was taken over by a resident professor. We started with Emily Jasser. Then we had Matthias Lilienthal. Then we had, the curricular committee. Then we had Ghalia Saadawi. Then we had Jonami and many others. And this, in a way, it started the first year. It was like there was a selection committee and all of that. But then the second year we had Jalal Toufi and Anton Viodok who did the second year, and it was open year. But with time, all of these participants have become the messengers to the program. So in every year when we, release the call, we have, participants who are just encouraging each other. For example, in the Indian context, if I say, pardon me, it's a whole continent, but the first year we started, we had one student. Now every year we have applications that reach around 40 participants that attend. Cyprus, Ramallah, Morocco. It is a matter of like osmosis and time and temporality, as I say. And in many ways, the programs have been actually affecting each other and affecting the whole synergy of Ashkal Alwan. And if you think of this year, I mean, we were so scared at the beginning that this Zoom convenings and all of that, but at the end, you understand that people are thirsty. They're not only thirsty for knowledge, but they're thirsty for community making. They're thirsty of thinking together. And these stratas of convening are the ones that helped homeworks. I think this is a very homegrown program that started 10 years ago, and the resident professors, the board members, the curricular committee, the advisors are the ones who took it over, and they're the ones with the teachers who taught in this program, who got so many people inside it. And it's really, it grew with time, and we have around every year 300 applications that we get from all over the world. Now, this is something that started, I would say the first edition started in a very timid way, but today in the 10th year, I think temporality is very important. And I think the people who were involved in it, it's not a program that discovered rocket science, it's a program that tried actually to integrate the specificities and the friendships and the networks that it was born of. This is HWP. It's the people who made it.
I think there's quite a lot of questions actually that speaks to all of you. So there is again a follow-up question in that respect. If basically the biennales, let me kind of, if I can sum this up, if they are operating under social and political uncertainty, but you also address community, how can this play out in the longer run? You know, like if the local becomes more important, but then with the current situation, we become more digital. So how do we kind of connect these? Now the kind of the audience is online in a way, and we try to operate on the location, on site, and be more there also for the people at the place. So how can those converge? And how can, one question is also, is there a possibility still to do local production, but then share it more widely internationally for those who cannot come and in other places? So, you know, this kind of like split between really being locally active, but now being confronted with communicating via the screen. There were several questions to that. I think it's a question we all ask ourselves.
Yeah, it's a huge question that I won't do justice to it. I'll just give a very brief sort of tentative answer. Namely, the reason why I was confused by the question is that the question of community is not resolved by the biennial anyway. Whether the, you know, pandemic, Zooms, digitalization, etc. I mean, even before this set in, forging a community via a biennial, we have different positions on this panel, but in my view, it's like painting with a hammer. It's not what a biennial is good at. The community building has to come from somewhere else, and then the biennial has to find a way to you know, support that, accelerate it, expand it, enrich it, etc. But the biennial is not the instrument which can create this sense of community. And if anything, this more ephemeral sense of, I don't know if community is still the right word, but exchange might be facilitated in this digital landscape that we're trying to be a little smarter about.
There might be some other opinions towards this, as you said, Tirdad, like yeah, Enrique.
Sorry, maybe to add to this, I think question how we think, for example, a cultural policy on biennials, how the state has a position and or how liberates and free the biennial to act without any, it's so different between the different countries, the possibilities of to understand. For example, also I think that there is this position of biennials as post-academic soils for people that it's expanding the knowledge acquired or developed on connected with universities in another context. So the possibility to understand the biennial as something, as a node that creates an interaction with other social notes that are concerned with the knowledge development. Yeah, I think that this is the position, a very like pragmatic position of biennials in the context of how we'll evolve also in the future, and the idea of interchange, the international interchange. I want to remark the work made by the International Biennial Association in that sense. The possibility not just to connect biennials as events, but also as archives that are compiling the sensitive information of each country. I think that the biennial as a blockchain of information of the of social paradigms, it's quite important to understand in that sense the possibility of how the archives of biennials are telling an alternative history of their countries. It's quite interesting in that sense also. Yeah.
In light of time, unfortunately, our time is kind of up almost, and it's but there is one last question that again addresses and speaks to that, and that maybe goes to each of you to maybe say a last round. And it says, it's by Martin German. It says, if we consider the pandemic as a caesura to look back at the last 30 years, where biennials and a pop culture like art world emerged in the mirror of a global economy that produced actually more inequality than ever before. What would you suggest, update or reboot?
Biennales will become files on NFT very soon.
Scary. Actually, the work that was sold for so much money was actually bought in Singapore, and exactly. Our institution is closing.
If you check the tweets, then you understand so many things.
But do you see, like, there? I mean, we heard very early also from Nada Shabbat, and so like about the Arab Biennale. Then there was very importantly in '74 the India Triennale. So biennales came. Sometimes then the Venice Biennale saw more than once its death, and then it re-emerged more powerful. So where do you see the Biennale? You think is the Biennale fatigue is real, or like you think, well, that's a luxury from the art world, but at our place, it's really important we continue to engage.
I guess it's similar to the previous question, a very broad question, in that there's two answers. You can either answer what you think will happen or what you want to happen. And what
I don't think you want to happen.
What I would like to happen is that now the moment to theorize is taken seriously, and that the idea of proposing what we actually would like to build upon, that this opportunity is taken. And I think that one of the things that biennales would be able to offer is a platform for proposals which can compete with the what was it called earlier, the global economy producing inequalities on an unprecedented scale. If we were to compete with that, we would need something other than the indeterminacy and the fly-in, fly-out, and this very faux naive internationalism that we were in love with for so long. I don't think it can compete with the ideological apparatus that has created the situation we're in. But in order to come up with something as ambitious as that, in my view, we need specialization. We need to focus on a given set of questions that respond to wherever we happen to be located, and to maybe paradoxically also be more modest in that sense.
I will take what I want. For example, I will want to have a more biennials to be more close to the hacktivist movement, to the open culture movement that it's sharing and using manuals to learn how to use devices and to create more autonomy in local aspects. This idea of distribution of knowledge that will give you tools to have more independence on your daily life. It's quite interesting in how becomes in a box tool of resources to not just to show the work of artists or the big statements, curatorial statements, but to give you tools. I think that this is quite interesting how the evolution of biennials could perform.
Yeah, in that sense, I would like to add one thing concerning Lubumbashi. And again, on the contextual level, one should consider that being in an industrial area, I mean, the population has been for a long time being used for the extraction purpose mainly, and without having any consideration of a human being, except the fact that it's a person that can produce benefits for the outside or for the investors. And there is this kind of inequality between what is produced and what the people are paid in a way. So, and that's, it's still the same situation, even when Lucrezia was telling the story of like lithium now it's used for the electric cars and whatever. Whenever those cars come back to Africa or in Congo, I mean, it's not those who were kind of extracting those minerals who can be able to buy it because it's more expensive. So there is this inequality in a way. And I think like, and our politicians are also keeping that situation constantly, and that helps also them to kind of get money from, to benefit from this situation. So for me, like what is interesting in making art and or in creating a community that can locally also defend and also kind of create a voice against what is going on even locally, but also in relation with what is going on internationally. It's more relevant in terms of what we're doing as a collective, as a picture structure, and also through the Biennial as a platform that can help us to connect with the international world. So and this is why we've been again creating this this training program because it's a way also to kind of to bring information to local people and also to train them in terms of how to engage with this inequality locally, and also to reflect it on the international level. So for sure that's with all the crisis that is going on now, there is the need also to really focus on the local situation and to make it more visible than what it has been since ages, I would say.
Yeah, I think sadly, but surely we're like reaching the end, and I think yeah, as usual, this is we're warming up, and I think now there could be so much that needs to be said. I just want to also mention apologies to those questions we couldn't answer. There were a lot of questions, which is great, and there were also really quite a number of greetings to you guys, like for your like that you continued, you do what you do, the inspiration that you give, and that you don't give in the challenging situations that you are. Christine, there was also one question about a gentrification that might happen now after the explosion, that there again will be winners out of such a situation, which we always face, and probably also in Katanga. And so I think there is lots to be said, and I really want to thank you for also straightforward kind of like statements about your situation. And I really want to thank also the audience for the many questions. And again, a big thanks to Sharjah to make this happen, even if one cannot come physically to Sharjah, which we all would have preferred, because as Okwi always said, it starts after the talk when we can really argue. And also a big thanks to Sana and Vasan, who are stemming here 10 days of panels on Zoom and managing all of us being in time and getting out of time. A big thanks, and a big thanks also to Hur and the team for really making this happening in this year. And we really wish we could see also all the exhibitions that are there. So hopefully next year we can come. Although we don't want to be the global travelers, but it's quite important to be at a place. So thank you again, Tirdad, Enrique, Christine, Lucrezia, and Sammy. And thanks everybody, and see you soon again somewhere.